This sitting is resumed. Prior to the suspension for lunch, this honorable chamber was debating the Central Bank of Barbados Bill 2020. To that we shall return. Honorable member for Microsoft Central.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Sir, I rise to lend my voice to this debate on this revised Central Bank of Barbados Act. In effect, as the Honourable Member for Christchurch East Central said, what we're doing is repealing the existing act and replacing it with one that we have determined after much consultation responds better to the changing global situation, the changing global dynamics in terms of financial and economic policy. Now, sir, the member for Christchurch East Central, in his introductory remarks, made reference to his early career as an economist and advised us that notwithstanding having graduated top of the class from his undergraduate degree, only began to understand economics really having started to work at the Central Bank of Barbados. I reflected as he was speaking that in my own experience, one only really begins to understand economics seeing how it plays out, how it affects and is affected by the daily lives of regular people. So I say that to suggest that I'm not sure that sitting in a room in the Central Bank of Barbados in itself gives one any better understanding of economics than when one graduates from a degree. But I believe that having offered himself for political service, the Honourable Member now has the best understanding that this life could give us about economics, which is really meant to be, which is really about the provisioning of goods and services and well-being to people and to different groups of people. So I begin there, sir, because I think it's important for those of us who do this work to realize that our job is about connecting what may seem to be something that is theoretical and academic, and which is not at all, connecting it to how people really live. That's the reason that we're here. That's the reason that economics exists. And I wanted to follow on from that by saying a bit about what are central banks for? Because I think that there's certain words that we use, that we throw around, that we take for granted that people understand or people can have a grasp of. And there is nothing at all that is out of the reach of people when it comes to this talk about economic policy, but I do think that it is our responsibility to relate it to everyone's lives. And as the Honourable Member for Christchurch East Central said in his introduction to this bill, we know that central banks are meant to be concerned with monetary policy, the business of interest rates and the supply of money and the rate of inflation and the exchange rate. So that's what we talk about when we're talking about monetary policy, and it's really all about how does the central bank make sure that inflation is kept in check? How does the central bank make sure that prices do not get out of the reach of regular people and companies? How does the central bank contribute to an environment where economic growth and economic development are possible? That's what the central bank is there for with respect to monetary policy. Fiscal policy, taxation, government expenditure is the domain of the government as separate from the central bank. So central banks deal with monetary policy, governments, the Ministry of Finance, Economic Affairs and Investment, and the government of Barbados are meant to deal with the fiscal policy. How do we collect revenue? How do we spend resources? Now, in small countries like Barbados that have a fixed exchange rate, central banks tend to do a bit more of the heavy lifting of policy, and this is something that we know to be true and that we've seen. And so the government of Barbados, the country, has to concern itself with what is the appropriate balance of the monetary policy side of things and the fiscal policy. And I think that that is an important public conversation. It has to be an important part of the public discourse. Because what we saw over the decade prior to this administration coming to service is that everybody seemed to be confused about that balance and that division of labor. And so what you had was a central bank at the time that, in the absence of clear guidance with respect to fiscal and macroeconomic policy, had to be everything to everyone, and in some regrettable ways, notwithstanding being a strong institution, but in some regrettable ways ended up being not much at all to anyone. What we saw, regrettably, was a situation where the government of the time really lost its way in terms of being able to set and stay firm on its fiscal policy agenda, being able to set and stay firm in its overall economic growth agenda. And so you saw then a central bank that was able to so blur those lines that at some point you were not sure who was speaking on whose behalf. Mr. Speaker, that is a very dangerous thing. It is very important for our government to maintain responsibility for policies related to government expenditure and the attending policies that affect that. And so we saw all kinds of things happening in terms of where was information coming from. Now, the way that this system is structured, there are certain key economic and social data that is collected and is published by the Barbados Statistical Service, which is a part of the Ministry of Economic Affairs. However, what we saw back then at the time was that all of a sudden the reliability of data being published by the central bank was one that we could no longer look forward to. So those of us who depend on the Barbados Statistical Service and the central bank for certain data, information is the basis on which good policy is built, started to see a situation where the kinds of things that were published, we could no longer necessarily believe to be true. Because in any given year, we saw that numbers were going in directions that could not be explained from the underlying policy. We saw data being published that arguably should not even have been published or have been sourced primarily from the Central Bank of Barbados. And so one of the things that this bill is very clear on is the mandatory provision of data by certain economic actors, because while there is some responsibility on the part of government and on the part of the central bank to make certain information available so that people can make decisions, so that the economy can be predictable, and so that if an investor wants to go into a particular sector, that information is available so that she or he knows which sector, what is happening in that space, and so on. I always say that with rights come responsibility. And so we keep hearing from our partners in the private sector and in the third sector and in other spaces that the government and the central bank have a responsibility to provide timely and credible data, and this is true. But here's the thing. We can only do so once we get data from those same actors. And so what happens in many cases is that we have certain surveys that are done, including a balance of payment survey. We need to get certain information on what is happening in certain sectors in order to then feed that information back to the public. We can only do that when those businesses and those individuals respond to surveys. And so this may seem like a small part of what this bill does that I am paying attention to. But I'm doing so because having some responsibility for the ministry in which the Barbados Statistical Services is housed, is located, it is very important that the data that is generated as official statistics is known to be reliable. There are entire countries who have failed IMF programs. There are entire countries who have been downgraded in certain key indices because of the lack of reliable data. In other words, by global standards, it cannot be that you can say anything about any particular activity in your economy and that you not have a responsibility to the people of that country and to the world to be able to report accurately. This is the reason, sir, that the Barbados Statistical Service, the Ministry of Economic Affairs, is now revising the Statistical Act. And so we will soon be in this place to discuss and to debate a new Statistics Act that, again, has to respond to what is happening in the current environment. A part of that, we'll have to look at the way that we analyze data. We'll have to look at the whole business of data analytics and the fact that it's not just about doing surveys and having people respond, but collecting administrative data and looking at it. And what does that mean? How often do people access a certain bus service? How long does it take to stand in a line to go to the eye clinic at the Queen Elizabeth Hospital? The kinds of user data that we need to be able to improve services. This is a big part of economic policy making. This is a big part of the role of government and its partners in making sure that people have what they need in order to live their best possible lives. And so, sir, I wanted to take the time because I strongly believe that while there are certain things that may seem a bit theoretical or seem complicated, most of the time they're not. And I encourage, through you, sir, Barbadians, to pay attention to what this bill does, how it responds to or how it seeks to address the things that affect us in our everyday lives. And I want to take a minute then to talk about the parts of the bill and what they speak to. Part 2 of the bill looks at the status and the powers, the objectives and the functions of the central bank in its constitution. Part 3 looks at capital, profits, and reserves. So it looks at maintaining reserve accounts and how the bank is able to do that. It looks at the issue of profits and losses, and so on. Part 4 looks at the very important area that the Honourable Member for Christchurch East Central spent some time on, which is administration, the whole business of governance of the central bank. And part 5 looks at the matter of currency and the parity of the Barbados dollar. A very key role of the central bank is to be able to maintain that. And I will come in a couple minutes to how that is done and to the importance of the central bank having the tools and the flexibility to be able to do that in a real way. Part 6 looks at the reserve of external assets, what we mean when we talk about foreign reserves, and how the bank needs to maintain that in order to maintain the peg to the dollar. The level of foreign reserves is the key ingredient to be able to stabilize the currency peg, to be able to stabilize the value of the dollar. And when we came to service in 2018, the reason that we went to the country to have that conversation about what mattered to Barbadians, and when Barbadians very clearly said back to us, yes, we want to maintain the stability of our currency, the role of the central bank in doing that is key, and that is why we have come here to have this very important conversation. Part 7 of the bill looks at foreign exchange operations, and that is important because how we deal with foreign exchange is very important for investors. And knowing what are the terms for them for getting foreign exchange in and out of the country. At Part 8, the bill goes into relations with banks, between the central bank, banks and other financial institutions. The Central Bank of Barbados is the prudential regulator and supervisor of the commercial banking system and of financial institutions. That role is important and will become more and more important as we go forward. And Part 9 looks importantly at the relationship between the central bank and the government. Part 10 goes into accounting and auditing. What are the internal and external audit functions that affect the bank? And Part 11 deals with some miscellaneous items, including savings and transitional provisions in case there is a change of directorship in the bank. But sir, in my brief time, I wanted to say a little bit about having dealt with the issue of data and how important it is that the accountability part of what this bill is trying to do is maintained, that the clear distinction between what the central bank reports on and what the Barbados Fiscal Service reports on, why that is so important. It is so important to us, sir, at the Barbados Fiscal Service, that right now we are getting ready to publish a national statistical data page with support from the fund. But the reason for that is that we need to have one place where everyone can go internationally and see certain key economic indicators. What's happening with the GDP? What's happening with inflation? How are prices rising and falling? What is the unemployment rate? These one page, one place where that is located. But linked to that, what we are also going to be doing as part of the new, what we're also going to be proposing as part of the new legislation is a calendar for the release of key information so that people can predict when will unemployment numbers be published, when will retail price index be published so that you can see the changes in prices and so on. And I make that commitment in terms of being able to publish data in a timely way, while also sending the message, sir, that the only way that the Barbados Fiscal Service can do that is when individuals and companies understand that they need to be able to submit that data to us. We need to be able to get that information. Some of it requires filling out a survey remotely. Some of it requires the fine men and women who are our field officers to go and knock at your door. But it's important because while it may seem like a nuisance, it is what we need in order to be able to develop economic policy. But I also want, sir, to focus on that distinction between monetary and fiscal policy. And at clause 40 in part 6 of the bill, it speaks to the duty of the Central Bank of Barbados to signal when there is a critical decline in the foreign reserves that would jeopardize the fixed exchange rate regime, and that at that time, when the central bank notices that that decline is coming, to then suggest recommendations and measures to forestall or to remedy the situation. And why is that important? It's important, sir, because in the last administration, we saw, and some of us felt as if we were watching helplessly from the sidelines while the reserves began to plummet. And as the reserves were declining, there are those of us who started to think, but how are we going to arrest this situation? Because when your reserves start to decline, it means that the central bank, in its role as lender of last resort to the commercial banking sector, cannot help you in the event of a crisis. The truth is, and we say this, and I don't know if people grasp the importance, but the truth is that if we had been hit with this COVID-19 pandemic back when reserves were at a meager 4.5 or 5 weeks, we would have had real reason to panic. And people talk about us discussing the matter of the level of the reserves as if it's academic. It is not academic. It is the money that you have saved up in case of a real crisis. It is what is there for when the commercial banks are not in a position to be able to finance the regular business of the country. And we think that that can't happen so easily, but it can. And so what this bill enables the central bank to do is to take action. You see the reserves plummeting, you know that this is leading to a crisis situation, to a financial crisis, to an economic crisis. The central bank's role is to be able to have some flexibility in how it manages those reserves to stop them from reaching critical levels. I want to say something as well, sir, about the matter of what the bill refers to as quasi-fiscal activities. Now, there is a running conversation about what central banks should or should not be able to do. And I think that it is perhaps, there's some who are of the view that central banks should stay away from things that look like fiscal activities, that things that have to do with expenditure or with tax or with getting involved in the actual financing of investment or financing of companies. But as I said before, there's no single blueprint. In countries that are small, like Barbados, in countries that have a fixed exchange rate, where quite frankly, central banks don't have as much to do as in other countries with a different exchange rate regime. There has to be that balance. There also has to be that balance because the fact is that a lot of your resources when it comes to financial and economic policy making and strategy and thinking are in your central bank. And so if you can't draw on those to help execute some key functions as a small island, then you're going to find yourself in some difficulty. And so we have provision in this bill for the central bank to be involved in things like the Enhanced Credit Guarantee Facility, which is a facility that is administered by the Central Bank of Barbados that provides a guarantee through commercial banks and other financial institutions for them to lend to individuals or to businesses where there are higher levels of risk than the commercial banks want to take on. Now, we could have a conversation in here, a whole separate debate, a whole separate conversation, sir, for a whole day on commercial banks' understanding of risk and the extent to which, in a small island that has a large, of which a large part of its economy is tourism. Not to say that it is not, that we will not diversify, but let us not fool ourselves. That when it comes to the idea of comparative advantage and what our assets are, that our tourist product is one of those. And so what we find happening is that in general, in this region, a commercial banking system that perhaps has narrowed its idea of risk, or the risk that they would want to assume, not accounting for the reality of small islands like Barbados when it comes to the agriculture sector and the tourism sector and so on. And so the Enhanced Credit Guarantee Facility is established at the central bank so that lending institutions can get a guarantee of up to 80% for these monies that they would want to lend to entities that or to ideas that they might consider risky. Now, why is that important? We keep saying that one of the issues with growth, one of the issues with entrepreneurship is access to credit, access to finance. And so the Enhanced Credit Guarantee Facility was established, and we are right now about to set up hopefully a second phase of that, and that's going through its approval process. But that was established so that we could actually get some innovative ideas to market, so that we would not have to continue to contend with this very prescribed idea of what risk is or what risk the commercial banks are not willing to assume, but that we could get around this real failure in the market by having this facility that gives this guarantee. And so that kind of role for the central bank to play is extremely important. And the bill makes provision for the central bank to be involved in these kinds of things. But this is also, sir, why we are right now restructuring and also looking to recapitalize the Enterprise Growth Fund Limited. Because that institution, that is also in the Ministry of Economic Affairs, also has had to help address that market failure, where we are not seeing the levels of liquidity in the commercial banking system be directed to the real innovative ideas that are coming from Barbadians and people who live here. And so the Enterprise Growth Fund Limited now has to shift its focus. It has to be that engine, and will be that engine, that really drives real new ideas in terms of agriculture and agribusiness, in terms of how we re-engineer the tourism sector, in renewable energy, and how we make sure that regular people can invest in this sector. With respect to medicinal cannabis, there's a whole reformulation of Enterprise Growth Fund Limited. Enterprise Growth Fund Limited really was this country's national development bank. And it has to step forward again and play that role. And this is where we start to see the relationship between the central bank's regulation of financial institutions and relationship with the credit market and how it affects real Barbadians. Because this is important. It is important that we understand that the central bank is not just an institution on a hill. Well, it's not on a hill, but I'm using that metaphorically. But it's not an institution on a hill that is just meant to regulate. In a country the size of Barbados, with the kinds of market failures, let's be real, that we have. Because until we get to a real understanding of small island vulnerability and what risk really looks like, some of the things that we say are risky are not really risky. And that is why we established things like the Trust Loan Fund, because we wanted to say to the market, if you all are not willing to bet on Barbadians, this Barbados Labour Party government is willing to bet on Barbadians and their ideas. because we know that they're among the best in the world. But as the Honourable Member of Christchurch Essential said, we have to and will look more closely at the role of the Central Bank of Barbados in looking at what commercial banks are doing as a part of the market. Commercial banks may be headquartered elsewhere, but once they come here, they don't live in a vacuum. They are part of this economy and have a role to play. And so what value is it to hold on to reserves, to hold on to excess liquidity, rather than to pump that back into the growth of the economy, in the growth of the country where you exist? Sir, there's one other, or perhaps two, if time allows, matter that I want to make reference to. And it has to do with the bank as the sole authority for the supervision, operation, and administration of the national payment system and clearinghouse facilities. And the Honourable Member who introduced the bill made reference to checks and getting rid of checks and making things easier for people. But I have to emphasize this because when we talk about a national payment system, what we're talking about is really making sure that there's no one who is on the margins of being a part of our financial system. And the Honourable Leader of the Opposition, you know, I think it must be a particular talent to be able to set up straw men and what ifs and slippery slope arguments, to really just create any circumstance just by speaking it into being. What if this were to happen, or what if that were to happen? Well, who knows? But I would love to see the day when the Honourable Leader of the Opposition deals in the facts that are before us. But he made reference to the idea that some people may be, if we go wholly towards a digitized, modernized payment system, that there are some people who might be left out. But sir, one of the principles of modernization and the digital economy, certainly one that this government has adopted wholeheartedly, is non-exclusion. So we make sure that those with no access to or interest in technology are not disenfranchised. And it means then that your national payment system will always have options for people who do not have that access to technology or are not likely to adapt to that technology. And that's perhaps the importance of the post office banking system. That is the reason that we're moving to using the postal system, the post office system, and I'm sure that we'll be back in this place having that discussion, as a way for people to carry out very simple payment and other unrelated functions that they will need to transact, the kind of business that they'll need to transact in their
The Honourable Member has 2 more minutes.
Thank you, sir. But I also want to say something that's very important in terms of that relationship between the government of Barbados and the central bank. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition made reference to Section 63 of the bill, which I think is important, which is that if the Central Bank of Barbados prescribes a particular macroeconomic policy that is not in the best interest of the country, then there has to be a mechanism by which the government of Barbados, the minister responsible, takes responsibility for the domain that is hers, which is setting the appropriate macroeconomic policy for the entire economic system to function. So that is not anything that is outside of the bounds. It is very clear in terms of the relative role of the central bank and the role of government that the macroeconomic stability of the country is the domain of the government of Barbados. And so that stipulation has to be there. But I also want to say that any law that is drafted can only make reference to the situation that obtains. And so to go back and forth about whether the Governor General will exist in 11 or 12 or 13 months is to distract from the issue, but the Honourable Member has developed a particular talent for doing that. And so, you know, we all have to stick to our areas of advantage. Sir, in closing, I want to say this. The role of the central bank, and I'm happy to see that the current governor of the central bank understands the importance of communication and engaging with the public. We had gotten to a place in this country where there was almost this notion that you don't have to talk to anybody. What happens in these walls is our business. And so I come to you as governor when I come to you, and until I do, well, you'll wait until I'm good and ready. And I'm glad to see there have been a recent series of very engaging events led by the current governor of the central bank, because the people of Barbados have a right to hear from chief policymakers and those responsible for establishing and executing policy in this country as appropriate. But I want to say finally that the central bank has many roles to play. One of those has to do with making sure that the projects that are financed externally from multilateral lenders, that the accounts that are established to execute those projects are well maintained. What we saw in the past was that in a mad scramble to make the reserves look a certain way, monies from all over the place were pulled in to say, yes, this money is ours, you could count that. And it might be a controversial thing to say, but I want to make it very clear that Barbados' reputation, I always say that my reputation is the only thing I have, similarly for our country. So that if you are shown not to be following the rules that other institutions have for the money that they lend or grant to you as a country, then you start to lose credibility. But I suppose that after 23 or 24 or 25 downgrades, that by that time, the whole notion of credibility is so vague that these things don't matter. But your word matters. And when you sign an agreement and you say that you're going to conduct yourself in a certain way, that matters. And that's why I'm pleased to be part of an administration in which these things, doing the right thing with respect to other people's money, with respect to the money paid in by taxpayers of Barbados and of other countries, is important. So, sir, I want to close by saying that I encourage, through you, all Barbadians to pay attention to what this bill allows for. Because these matters are not academic. These matters are not theoretical. The way that you interact with your commercial bank, whether you can get a loan to set up a valet shop, or whether you can access a certain kind of mortgage, these are all the things that affect our daily lives and that we affect. And so I want to say that this bill is just a part of a series of very much needed reforms that this administration has been spending a lot of time and consultation on. And with those few words, sir, I want to commend this Central Bank Barbados bill.
Honourable Member for St. Peter.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I want to join this debate relatively briefly to say a few things. Maybe I should start by saying that I almost rose on a point of order when the Honourable Member for St. Michael's South Central was speaking. She referred to a statement by the Leader of the Opposition and suggested that it was some skill. And I really thought she was misleading the House by calling that kind of approach a skill. But I understood what she meant, and I did not rise at that point. Because that is not a skill, Mr. Speaker. That is really not a skill. That is really trying to mislead and be in some ways disingenuous. I remember the Leader of the Opposition, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but I remember the days when he agreed with us that what the then opposition was doing was not correct. The matter of keeping interest rates low, having interest rates low and driving investors or potential investors to invest in government paper. So I'm sure he must remember that that is not a policy of this government, because he and the rest of us stood on the same platform and spoke to that matter. Now, he would also have known that we came into office with the intention initially of saving the dollar. So there are a number of things, and I think this is something that we need to keep saying to those who have sent us here. There are a number of things that we did not agree with, that we still do not agree with, that at this point we have not been able to address. And I say this because the people who have sent me here and the people who have sent the rest of us here expect us to be clear and fair and truthful and upfront, so that it is not beyond my people and our people to understand us when we say, while we oppose a measure and we still do not agree, there is an order to which we do things. And we come into office to serve the people with certain priorities. Saving the dollar was that first priority. And as fate would have it, just as we are about to address a whole number of other matters, then the pandemic hits us. So the matter of interest rates is not, low interest rates is nothing, I don't even call it a straw man. It is just disingenuous to suggest that that is this government's policy, or to say it in such a way, because this is where there's certain words I know you can't use, and as a person of faith, no words like nastiness and those kind of things, I don't like using either. But it feels like bad faith when you say things in a certain way so that somebody can say technically you haven't said it, but the way you've said it tells everybody who has heard that this is really what you mean to say. I don't think that's nice. And to suggest that low interest rates and trying to push people to government paper is a policy of this government or a direction this government wants to go in is just wrong. The other thing, before I speak to governance generally, is the matter of securities, bonds, whatever the paper is, and secondary markets. Now, Mr. Speaker, you can choose to buy sugar from Massey Distribution on Spring Garden, or you can wait till Massey sells it to the shop in Bank Hall, and you can go to the shop and buy the sugar. You decide how you do that. There's nothing fancy about primary and secondary markets. If you buy something and you want to sell it to somebody else who wants to sell it on, then that's what you do. But the notion or the suggestion that there is something so strange, almost underhanded, about secondary markets is again to make a suggestion, maybe plant some kind of bad seed in the minds of people to make them believe or to have them believe that a secondary market is something a little bit shady, and if boss bonds are being sold on the secondary market, then that suggests that there is something wrong with the whole system. Well, I grew up in a shop, and when we sold sugar, I never thought there was anything more wrong with the sugar than when it came from the sugar barn on Country Road. Sugar was sugar, and you bought it at the place where you wanted to buy it. And those who wanted to sell, sold in the locations they wanted to sell it. I just wanted to speak to those two things. I did not rise on a point of order because I've come to realize that sometimes when people have nothing to say and you raise on points of order, you give them something to hold on to and add 5 minutes to the presentation. And my father always tell me, you live and you learn. So I'm done doing that. And for Hansard, done is D-U-N. Mr. Speaker, governance is something that this party in government has always taken very, very seriously. The matter of governance. This matter of good governance started not now, started in 1938. How we manage the economy, how we manage the country, how we manage the society. It has always been, and from talking to people from the time I was young, it has always been seen as a hallmark of the Barbados Labour Party in office. Good governance, putting structures and systems in place that would allow for proper functioning of institutions and making changes when those changes became necessary to ensure that proper functioning actually continued. Good governance is important in the best of times. But Mr. Speaker, in a time like this time, we're in the midst of a pandemic. So a pandemic is an outbreak of disease on a global scale. In this kind of a situation, where economies are being brought to their knees, governance is even more important. And I want to commend the Ministry of Finance, Economic Affairs and Investment for bringing this bill at this time. Because with the myriad of matters that that ministry with its 2 divisions or 3 divisions has to look after, to be able to bring this bill to this honorable chamber at this time, I think is highly commendable. And I want to commend the ministers and the public officers who have worked to bring this bill to us today. But we live in an uncertain world, a very uncertain world. And when you are in an uncertain situation, then systems have to be put in place to bring order and to bring certainty to life. In this case, to economic activity, but as the Honourable Member for St. Michael's South Central said, economic activity only really refers to how people live their lives. Economic activity is going to the shop to buy sugar. That is economic activity. And if we look at even more basic things, economic activity is also going to the shop to buy toilet paper. So whatever you do that causes you to have to buy toilet paper, it all boils down to economic activity. And so a bill like this that speaks to an aspect of how we manage our economic affairs, particularly in this situation, the monetary policy, on the monetary policy side, this is important because there is need for certainty, there is need for order in our economic activity. There are a few things, I promise not to be too long, so there are a few things that I wanted to speak to. The matter of the prohibition against the purchase of government securities except in the primary market, I should say that, except in 2 situations. And this bill speaks to something that I've said in this honorable chamber before. this government is prepared to read the situation and make any necessary adjustments. So I say to you, Mr. Speaker, that if this bill had come 12 months ago, it would have said, except in cases of natural disasters, and it probably would have ended there. But this government is a government that learns. And so, bringing a bill to this Honourable Chamber in December of 2020, we have not just the matter of natural disasters, because you'd have heard the Prime Minister, Honourable Prime Minister, you'd have heard Honourable Member for Christchurch East Central, and the Honourable Member for St. Michael's South Central speak to the natural disaster clauses in the arrangements that we have made with our creditors and those who hold our debt. But having learned and being a government that learns, what is included in this central bank bill is not just the prohibition against securities, trade purchase of securities in the primary market, given the exception of natural disasters, but also given the exception for breakout of infectious disease. And that is important, Mr. Speaker. I don't want to say it is obvious, but I think the pandemic has shown us that there is the possibility of having a situation that is so dire that it will require drastic action. And so while this clause, well, this part of Part 9 of the bill makes the prohibition, I am of the view that it lends to good management because it allows for adjustments to that prohibition in the case of extreme circumstances. I think persons learn, like yourself, Mr. Speaker, use the term force majeure. Sometimes I may not be pronouncing it well. I'll have to ask the Honourable Attorney General or the Leader of Government Business. I'm not schooled in that language. But it allows for exceptions in those extreme cases, which I think all Barbadians would recognize need to be exceptions. There were times when we felt in a hurricane, we needed exceptions to a number of things because we now got to build back, roofs off, power lines down, all that kind of stuff. We have now come to realize that a pandemic, an outbreak of infectious disease, can render us just as helpless as is the experience of some countries as a natural disaster. And so I think the inclusion of that clause is a very good one. It also sets, Mr. Speaker, this bill, conditions on advances from the Ways and Means account. And I think that that is important. It has been said many times. And while I am not one to keep harping on what happened in the decade before we came to office, what I will say to you is that Barbados was taken to the brink because of the abuse of this facility. Absolute abuse. You cannot go, I cannot go to a bank having set up an overdraft facility and just keep writing checks. It doesn't work that way in real life. And the management of an economy is real life. And so a government must not be able to, having been told what your limit is, just keep writing checks. Because that opens the door to mismanagement, abuse, and just as happened coming up to 2018, can take us right to the brink. Luckily, the people of Barbados stopped the rot at that point. But it could have taken us over the edge. And so setting the conditions on how those advances of the Ways and Means account are dealt with is also something that Barbadians ought to be happy is in this piece of legislation. the Honourable Member for St. Michael South Central spoke to statistics and the gathering of information. They say confession is good for the soul. And I have to make a confession. I have received in my previous life many balance of payments survey forms. And to tell the truth, Mr. Speaker, I don't remember ever filling out one of them. But now that I'm in this place, I realize how important it is. And so I have to agree. I have to agree that there should be a penalty to not returning that information when it is requested. But I think we have to do a bit more than just putting the penalty on. And I really want to call on the ministry, the entire ministry, because this is all for the finance division, but also for the economic affairs division where Barbados Statistical Service is located. I think we have to, on an ongoing basis, educate our people, individuals and businesses and business people, about the importance of having the information that would allow for governments and policymakers to make good decisions. Because good policy cannot be made if there's not good information. And so I believe that this clause is properly in the bill, and I'm saying it now, but I'm also calling for the ministry to do some educating so that people move from responding because they want to avoid a $10,000 or $20,000 fine to responding because they recognize that this is important for the management of the affairs of the country. And this is a party that believes in properly managing the affairs of the country. And so I want to appeal to business people, to individuals, respond to the balance of payment surveys, respond to the labor surveys, respond to all these surveys you get, because that is what will allow our country, its policymakers, its public officers to craft good policy. There are a couple of things that speak to on the accounting side. And, this is really, for me, another example of good governance. There's the matter of rotating the auditors. Now, I used to be, in another previous life, I used to be on the audit team for the central bank. And for the audit firm that I worked with at the time. And the central bank's audit was always an interesting audit to be working on. Even going in just to count the money. As a youngster, Mr. Speaker, to go in just to do what we call the stock count used to be a very interesting thing. And you didn't mind spending all of O'Leary's evening into O'Leary's night doing it because it was just something very fascinating. But the matter of rotating auditors, I think, is important, maybe especially in a small society like ours. It is important for the independence of the institution, that the bonds that happen, because all of us live around here and we know each other. It is important for a firm not to believe that it has to give a particular opinion or that it has to overlook something that comes to its attention only because it wants to retain the audit. And that, I'm not saying happens, because I would not want to say that about my former profession, but I want to say that it is possible. And if we're going to craft legislation, then we have to foresee what is possible and put systems in place to mitigate against bad practice. And I think the idea of rotating auditors is a good one. I also like the reference in the bill, I think this is at part 10, in this same section, to adhering to international financial reporting standards. That is important. Those who read the financial statements of the Central Bank of Barbados must be comfortable that when it sees a categorization of creditors or liquid assets or current liabilities or equity, that that person's understanding of the term is not some strange new definition, but that the normal understanding, normal meaning the understanding that is part of what we know as the International Financial Reporting Standards, that my understanding is your understanding, because the same standard is being used. And I think it is important for all of us, but particularly those who will read the financial statements, to be clear and comfortable that international financial reporting standards are needed. Like I said before, Mr. Speaker, order is important for organizations generally. Order is critical for a country. Order generates a confidence that is necessary for all of us, because all of us are economic actors. Confidence is necessary if we are to act in a way to maintain the viability of the country that we are so happy to be a part of, of which we just celebrated 54 years of independence. If there is not that order, if there is not that certainty, then we open ourselves to speculation. And an example of that, at least what we were told was an example of that, was sometime maybe 2 or 3 years before we came to office. I'm sure the Honourable Member for Christchurch West East Central would remember this. We were told that part of the reason for a pretty sudden reduction in foreign exchange reserves was because of capital flight. That happens when people are uncertain. That happens when there is disorder. And that is one of the reasons why the people got rid of the last government. Uncertainty, disorder leads to all kinds of implications and can lead to implosion. And so the matter of governing well, making sure that there's order in our financial systems is important to the man on the street. It is important to all of us, because if it doesn't happen, if there's no order, if there's no certainty, there's capital flight, which leads to a reduction in foreign exchange. There's the lack of investment, which means jobs are not being created. And that investment could be initial investment. It could also mean investment in existing businesses to grow existing businesses. If those things don't happen, then it affects all of us. It affects the entire country. There are no additional jobs. When there's no economic activity, then there is no tax revenue, or not sufficient tax revenue. So no money to buy buses, garbage trucks, to start to fix roads. All of these things, the lack of order impacts every single person in Barbados. And that is the reason why I am commending this bill, not just to you in this honorable chamber, Mr. Speaker, but to the entire country. I am aware that when people hear Central Bank Bill, Central Bank Act, they believe it is the purview for people who have brains of some different shape or size. But this is a matter that affects everybody. That certainty is necessary if we are to move forward as a country, if we are to avoid the speculative behavior which will undermine the viability of a small open economy like ours. It is just needed. Just like order is needed in industrial relations, because if we have people treating workers like trash, or if we have workers just deciding to walk off, when things get disorderly, then we have problems. And so, while I commend this bill to this Honourable Chamber and to the people of Barbados, I also say to employers and managers, and I have to include managers because I know, not just recently, but I do know that sometimes managers try to be rougher than the owner to make a point. And sometimes they treat those who used to be their peers, who they supervise, as trash, not because the owner of the establishment wants them treated as trash, but because they have now arrived and they hold the keys. And so they maybe hark back to a point where they feel they should also be wearing the court hat and wearing a short khaki pants. Those days are over, because that kind of action breeds disorder. When people, and I know this of Barbadians, and I've kind of thought through comparing Barbados to even some of our Caribbean neighbors. When Barbadians react, it is usually when they're being pushed to a certain point. And I want to say to employers, as I say to workers, let us remember that Barbados's claim to fame, we have gotten to where we are, mainly, not only, mainly because we have managed, at least in the post-independence era, to maintain a certain level of order. So that even when, as bad as the other guys were, the last government was, when they lost every seat, they put their hands up and they walked away. But some of them are creeping back, without shame. But that apart, there is a certain order that attains to how we see ourselves. And I'm calling on managers of organizations not to do anything that will destroy the order that is necessary for the functioning of a well-ordered society, for a good society, and not to do things that will push people to the point where they have to react in the way that we're seeing some reaction in our society. It is important for us, Mr. Speaker, if we are all to live in a decent, fair, just, non-discriminatory society, that we do and that we follow the principles that are set out in this, or that form the foundation of this central bank bill. Those principles that speak to good governance, those principles that speak to a recognition that a country is not just dollars and cents, but a country is made up of people who are, at the end of the day, the primary economic actors. And with those words, Mr. Speaker, I'm obliged to you.
Honourable Member for Christchurch East Central.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Member St. Peter, can you turn off your mic?
I want to commend the honourable members who contributed to this debate. Mr. Speaker, as you are aware, our mission has not yet been completed as a government. COVID certainly has, as we would say, sir, thrown the cat amongst the pigeons in relation to our progress. But we are still committed, sir, to transforming and reforming a number of entities across this country. And in so doing, sir, it is the intention of this government to transform Barbados totally, such that we are world-class, sir, within 7 years. I just wish to just respond to a couple of issues raised by the honourable leader of the opposition, because the perspective that he put before this chamber, which the honourable member for St. Peter has and as well as the Honourable Member for St. Michael South Central, pretty much put it very well, because it is instructive, sir, that this government came to office at a time when we were under great economic stress, and the last government, sir, had deliberately determined that there would have been a policy change with respect to the minimum deposit rate, moving from 2.5% then, sir, to just about 0.1%. Specifically, sir, to then issue those savings bonds, which we all recall, sir, were issued at a very time which I indicated, sir, that the Central Bank of Barbados they were printing at that time $50 million a month, sir, in order to help finance government expenditure. And to suggest that that may have been this government's policy, or even to suggest that because interest rates are still very low today, that somehow it is this government's policy, without recognition, sir, that we have successfully completed not just the domestic debt restructuring, sir, but equally the external debt restructuring, that from a financial perspective would have seen a significant impact on the profitability of some of these very financial institutions. As a matter of fact, sir, I recall during some of the very heated exchanges we had with the representatives of the creditors, the impact of IFRS 9, sir, on the banking sector, and the potential losses which the debt restructuring delivered as a result of the reduction in interest rates, as well as the extension of the tenor or the duration of the newly issued securities, meant that from an operational perspective, a number of the financial institutions were no longer receiving the kinds of rates of returns that they were receiving under the previous government, because of those many downgrades, sir, that this country had suffered. And therefore, in understanding the current environment, it is as if, sir, you could go downtown, sir, and buy a puzzle, open the box, skin out the pieces, and expect all of the pieces to magically fall into place all at once, as you will see on the puzzle box, sir. And therefore, this government continues, sir, as quickly as we can to reform a number of these institutions, to address some of the systemic neglect, sir, occasioned by the lack of interest on the part of the previous administration, that we are now building back, sir, literally institution by institution, system by system, to ensure that we can create that Barbados, sir, that we will all be proud of. But in so doing, I impress upon Barbadians, sir, through you, that we have to pay attention, sir, to the institutions and how they are managed, how we resource them, and how we can bring a greater level of accountability of the institutions to us, but us as a people too, sir, recognizing that we have a part to play in pushing for the kinds of reforms that we all want to see. And the reality is, sir, is that there are some who are reluctant to make changes because the change happens to be, the status quo happens to be good for me. And there will be others, sir, who want to see changes to improve the way of life for a wider cross-section of people. And very often, sir, there's that conflict. And therefore, as a society, sir, we have to constantly monitor and implement policy, sir, that ensures that we are able to bring the majority along the development trajectory and the path to ensure that we can keep this Barbados, sir, as beautiful as we can. Sir, the vexing issue of the way banks and other financial institutions interact with their clients is one, sir, that has not gone unnoticed by this government. And as you are aware, sir, in the throne speech, we determined that we shall establish, sir, a financial services tribunal. And whilst this bill today speaks to the operation of the central bank, and you would appreciate, sir, as we have determined, the central bank must continue to ensure that there's financial stability in the system. And therefore, the Financial Services Tribunal, as contemplated, sir, will focus more on the market-driven criteria or performance of the way that financial institutions in general relate to consumers, leaving the mandate of the central bank to ensure the financial stability of the entire financial system, which includes banks, credit unions, as well as insurance and other Part 3 institutions in collaboration with the Financial Services Commission. But we determined that based on what the central bank does as the regulator, that with respect to protecting the system, that we will devise the Financial Services Tribunal, sir, in order to be able to respond to many of those complaints and to ensure that no Barbadian, sir, or anybody who chooses to reside in Barbados will be disenfranchised in any way with respect to access to whether it's banking, insurance, sir, or any other financial services, that we can cover off that. So that, sir, is something that we are working on very quickly in order to be able to start to turn around the nature in which financial institutions treat with their client class. Now, the reality is, sir, any accusation that the government is keeping interest rates low in order to sell bonds at a higher rate, sir, it is difficult to contemplate how such a charge could be made against this government when, sir, you will recall that with the exception of the boss bonds, which incidentally, sir, are now being sold, represents the choice, sir, of public servants to sell those bonds in the open market. In the same way, sir, that anyone who currently has a restructured bond from the domestic debt restructuring can equally sell their bonds, sir, in the market. Because as we speak, sir, the government of Barbados has not issued officially any bond to be bought in the open market, sir, since October 1st of 2018. As you would recall, sir, as we were leading up to the debt restructuring, we had suspended, sir, open market operations. We agreed during the transition period, sir, that we will roll over, sir, the Treasury bill financing with the domestic institutions in order to allow us to reach a point where we can restructure all of our debt. And all of that was done, sir, between May and October 1st in order to ensure that we kept the debt in check. But the government of Barbados, sir, has not issued any bonds to the market. So any accusation, sir, that we are keeping interest rates low in order to sell debt into the market, sir, I think is unfounded. And I would not want Barbadians to believe that his government is in any way participating in some kind of scam or charade or any such thing, sir. The issue of bonds to public servants, sir, in a real sense, represents what you may refer to as a private placement, sir, because it is a specific set of people that the bonds are issued to, and those persons can then determine whether they will keep them, sir, those public servants, or whether they will sell them into the open market for those who wish to purchase said bonds. And so, whilst I know that in another place, sir, the concept of fake news and making up stuff, sir, seems to have taken on a level of fever. I'm happy, sir, that here in Barbados that we know different. And therefore, I wish to disavow any idea that the government of Barbados, that this government, is deliberately keeping interest rates low in order to issue debt into the market. Nothing, sir, could be further from the truth. What I would say, sir, is that in the context of what I mentioned earlier about the recapitalization of the central bank, and as we indicated would happen as a result of the domestic debt restructuring, that there would have been a period of time during which, sir, the government will not need to finance any of its operations through the issuance of debt. Now, you would recall we determined that the BOSS bonds are simply, sir, to reallocate cash from current to capital, which is what the mechanism has allowed us to do so that we can enhance economic activity at this time. But the potential recapitalization, sir, of the central bank would perhaps, depending on how it's executed, may precipitate, sir, some issuance of new debt into the market. And therefore, it is from that perspective that we knew that whilst we are not necessarily required to issue, under the structure of the program, any new debt to finance any fiscal deficits, given that we were running surpluses, that clearly, and we knew, sir, that with this 4-year period over which we were initially contemplating with respect to the program, that we would not have to issue debt. However, the absence of the government issuing debt into the market clearly has left a void for pension schemes and other institutional investors, sir. And what the BOSS bonds have demonstrated, sir, is that there is still great appetite for debt in the market, and therefore, in reviewing the circumstances, then we may very well, over the course of certainly the next few months, sir, make a determination as to what is the level potentially of the recapitalization of the central bank, and what that may occasion, sir, with respect to being able to, in a real sense, sir, dip your toe back into the waters with respect to that. But appreciate, sir, that it is not intended in any way to finance government operations. However, we must appreciate that within the context of the capital markets in Barbados, government still is the major issuer with respect to securities, and certainly in this environment, it is something that we will have to contemplate, given that there is a mismatch both on the central bank's balance sheet, sir, with respect to the assets that it currently has vis-a-vis the liabilities, but equally, sir, there is demand within the context of the private sector, But obviously the government, over the course of the last 2 years, we have not issued any new debt, and therefore that demand has to be soaked up somewhere. Now, the reality of this, of the situation equally, sir, is that we have had a significant disruption because of COVID-19. And the economy certainly, sir, has taken a significant shock. And to the extent that the Honourable Leader of the Opposition referred to the liquidity in the banking system, I want us to appreciate a couple of things. The business of banking or provision of financial services, sir, still pretty much has to be predicated on how do you protect investors and depositors. And whilst we do have a deposit insurance scheme, what is important is to understand, sir, the trajectory for growth and how those resources will be deployed in being able to deal with growing business and attracting investment in the country. And as I said, sir, the central bank, when we bring the legislation to deal with the credit reporting, sir, will be responsible for ensuring that the regime that sets up the credit reporting mechanism, we believe will be a critical, sir, a critical component in being able to unlock these very resources that the Honourable Leader of the Opposition is referring to, simply because, sir, as it stands at the moment, there are gaps perhaps within the context of institutions, because any of us, sir, could go down Broad Street or any part of Barbados, sir, and borrow money from any bank, any Part 3 institution, sir, and there's no obligation, sir, for anybody to share information about us and our payment history as it stands at the moment. Now, whether good or bad, sir, the reality is that that information gap prevents decisions from being made with respect to investment. And therefore, as we seek to build up the credit profiles for individuals, businesses, investors, sir, in the context of Barbados, whilst it will not happen overnight to soak up all of that liquidity, the reality is that we believe that that will be one critical step in the process to be able to redeploy, sir, some of those resources across the financial system in order to help build out the economic infrastructure. But equally, as I said, sir, the digital transformation is a very important element within that process, and therefore we fully appreciate that once we put these systems in place, that we will be able to achieve that which we have been trying to achieve for some time. And so, sir, this bill, as I said, is just to bring one saga, if you like, sir, to an end. The next phase, sir, is to determine the level of recapitalization that we can contemplate with respect to the bank. The bank has business to execute now on behalf of the people of Barbados, sir, which we have charged them to do, to help restore the trust and credibility that ordinary Barbadians, sir, used to have in the Central Bank of Barbados. And this government, sir, will continue to lead in advocating for reforming institutions in order to respond to the needs of the various constituents that they're serving, sir, with respect to the banking sector, with respect to the business community, sir, with respect to depositors, sir, who are putting their monies into these said banks, sir. And we are taking concrete steps to respond to a number of these issues. And so therefore, I believe that our track record, sir, up until now, has been credible as a government. We will continue, sir, to build on the progress that we have made. And notwithstanding COVID, sir, notwithstanding COVID, we will continue to commit to improving the life, sir, of ordinary Barbadians. This bill, sir, before the chamber, as I said earlier, sets out the the manner in which we expect, sir, the central bank to operate in a modern Barbados, to be an engaged regulator, sir, and to be able to facilitate, sir, innovation and investment, as they have done by working with the Financial Services Commission, sir, to develop the sandbox such that they can better understand the new technologies in order for deployment. And that, sir, is what we would expect of any institution, because whilst we appreciate that the central bank has been a traditional institution, in this, the 21st century, sir, we must now leverage that experience and understand that where there's uncertainty, that we test in the environment, in the context of the sandbox, to allow the regulators to understand any products before they are unleashed onto the citizens of this country, such that regulators, sir, can feel comfortable that any financial product that any Barbadian in this country, sir, chooses to engage in, that whilst we could never, ever, sir, eliminate total risk, the reality is that no risk, no reward. But the underlying conditions under which people are making financial decisions, sir, we want to ensure that the regulators have, in a real sense, sir, kicked the tires to make sure that everything is in working order, and therefore allow citizens to be able to make financial decisions that are in their interest, knowing that they have been provided with the best possible information. And so long as the central bank, and as well as the other regulators, sir, continues to work in that vein and to give the various pieces of information to consumers, then we will be confident, sir, and comfortable that Barbadians, and certainly working with the newly established Financial Literacy Bureau, would allow Barbadians, sir, to be able to make better financial decisions on behalf of themselves and their families. And so, sir, I want to commend this bill to the chamber. I want to thank you, sir, for indulging me in responding to the honorable leader of the opposition. I want to thank members who have contributed to the bill, and I beg to move then, sir, that this bill be read a second time. I'm obliged to you.
Question is that the bill be read a second time. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. You think the ayes have it?
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that you do not leave the chair and the House resolve itself in committee for further consideration of this bill.
The question is that the Speaker do not leave the chair and the House resolve itself into committee for further consideration of this bill. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Me think the ayes have it.
This House is now in committee.
Part 1, clauses 1 and 2.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that clauses 1 and 2 stand back.
Part
Part 1, clauses 1. Part 1, clauses 1.
Sorry. Part 1, clauses 1 and 2 stand back.
Second. Question is that part 1, clauses 1 and 2 stand par. All honorable members in favor, please say aye. All those against, please say nay. I think the ayes have it.
Part 2, clauses 3 to 6.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that Part 2, clauses 3 to 6 stand back.
Question is that part 2, clauses 1 to 6, 1 to 3 to 6 stand par. All members in favor, please say aye. All those against, please say nay. I think the ayes have it.
Part 3, clauses 7 to 10.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that Part 3, clauses 7 to 10 stand par.
Question is that part 3, clauses 7 to 10 stand par. All honorable members in favor, please say aye. All those against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
Part 4, clauses 11 to 32.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that Part 4, clauses 11 to 32 stand part.
Question is that part 4, clauses 1 to 11 to 32 stand par. All honorable members in favor, please say aye. All those against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
Part 5, clauses 33 to 39.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that Part 5, clauses 33 to 39 stand part.
Question is that part 5, clauses 33 to 39 stand par. All honorable members in favor, please say aye. All those against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
Part 6, clause 40.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that Part 6, clause 40 stand part.
Question is that clause 6, part 6, part 6, clause 40 stand par. All honorable members in favor, please say aye. All those against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
Part 7, clauses 41 to 43.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that Part 7, clauses 41 to 43 stand part.
Question is that part 7, clauses 41 to 43 stand par. All honorable members in favor, please say aye. All those against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
Part 8, clauses 44 to 55.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that Part 8, clauses 44 to 55 stand part.
Question is that part 8, clauses 44 to 55 stand par. All honorable members in favor, please say aye. All those against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
Part 9, clauses 56 to 63.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that Part 9, clauses 56 to 63 stand part.
Question is that part 9, clauses 56 to 63 stand par. All honorable members in favor, please say aye. All those against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
Part 10, clauses 64 to 68.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that Part 10, clauses 64 to 68 stand part.
Question is that part 10, clauses 64 to 68 stand par. All honorable members in favor, please say aye. All those against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
Part 11, clauses 69 to 79.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that Part 11, clauses 69 to 79 stand part.
Question is that part 11, clauses 69 to 79 stand par. All honorable members in favor, please say aye. All those against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
Schedule.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that the schedule to be the schedule to the bill.
Question is that the schedule be the schedule to the bill. All honorable members in favor, please say aye. All those against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
Report.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that you do not report to His Honor the Speaker the passing of one bill in committee.
Question is that I do not report to His Honor the Speaker the passing of one bill in committee. All honorable members in favor, please say aye. All those against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
The chairman of committees has reported the passing of one bill in committee.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that this bill be read a third time.
Seconder, please. The question is that the aforementioned bill be read a third time. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Meeting the ayes have it.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that this bill be now passed and cited as the Central Bank of Barbados Act 2020.
The question is that this bill be passed and so cited. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Meeting the ayes have it. This bill is passed and so cited.
Speaker, recommittal of government notices.
Honourable Leader, Government Business.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg to give notice of the Drug Abuse Prevention and Control Amendment Bill 2020, as well as a resolution to adopt the report of the Standing Orders Committee.
Reports from select committees.
Mr. Speaker, I beg the adoption of the report of the Standing Orders Committee. This morning, we would have met as the Standing Orders Committee to discuss moving in the direction of being able to allow members of Parliament to be able to meet, in some cases physically and also virtually. I think, as everyone will appreciate, this has been on the table for quite some time. And we basically have been able to come to a consensus with the assistance of the Leader of the Opposition, who would have weighed in, as he usually does, to offer his input and guidance in some cases to allow us to come to a position where we can use the available technology, particularly in this COVID-19 pandemic, to alter the way in which Parliament will be able to meet going forward. So with that, Mr. Speaker, I beg to move the adoption of the report of the Standing Orders Committee.
Resolution, Honourable.
And to lay the report.
Right, we just learned it. Yeah. The question is that this aforementioned report be laid. All those honourable members in favour, please say aye. All those against, please say no. Me think the ayes have it.
First readings of bills.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move the first reading of the Drug Abuse Prevention and Control Amendment Bill 2020.
Question is that the aforementioned bill be read the first time. All those honourable members in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Me think the ayes have it.
Speaker, recommittal of government business. Order number 3. In the name of the Honourable Leader of the House, of a resolution to adopt the report of the Standing Orders Committee.
Honourable Leader, Government Business.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I beg to move the adoption of the report of the Standing Orders Committee, which, as I stated earlier, would have been to allow Parliament to be able to meet virtually as well as physically in the foreseeable future, in the event that there are some members who may not be able to attend because of their particular vulnerability, but also to facilitate this process going forward, given the uncertainty of the times that we are presently facing. And it will be for the duration of the COVID-19 pandemic.
The question is that this resolution do now pass. All those honourable members in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Me think the ayes have it. This resolution stands passed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And with that, we've come to the end of today's, sorry. Oh, sorry, right. Next week. Yeah, okay. Mr. Speaker, I beg to move the suspension of the sitting until, how long? 10 minutes? 20 past? Until 4:15 in the afternoon.
Second. The question is that this honourable chair will be suspended until 4:15 p.m. All those honourable members in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Me think the ayes have it. This honourable chair will stand suspended until 4:15 p.m.